Here we are at our last chapter of the book, and in that chapter we are talking about the future of the family. Obviously, we have no crystal ball, and so we are just going to be looking at the trends and saying these are probably going to continue, or if there's something abrupt happening in the future that we can foresee, maybe that'll change the way things are going. But in essence, we're going to be looking at the fact that we have increasing diversity. We also have increasing inequality and social change. But there's also a pushback. There's always a response to the change. And we'll wrap it up and look at the possibility that we will be living a lot longer in the future. I've got my doubts, but we'll explore the idea. All right. So there are opportunities for future growth, for improving the family, as well as challenges, right? A couple of things here that are real big. I think inequality is probably the biggest problem that we have right now. It's been growing since the 1960s, and it seems to be ruining everything, including the family, okay? Maybe as a part of this is the number of children born has declined. I don't know if this is an absolute number or this is just as a percentage here, but the number of children born per woman just keeps going down, and especially among the better educated women. All right, we have an increase in diversity, specifically increasing interracial marriages, increasing gay and lesbian marriages, but also increasing their rights, and a decrease in the, hey, you're a man, therefore you have to go over here and do this job, and you're a woman, so you go and do something different than that. We're seeing decreased gender inequality. But when it comes to income, when it comes to tasks that are done in the home, we still have a long way to go on that front. All right. Let's talk about race and ethnicity. There are differences across racial and ethnic groups. I mean, if there weren't, then we would question whether it's really an ethnic group, because an ethnic group is one that behaves or believes or dresses or talks different. And so certainly that's going to be a big part of this. So immigrants tend to have a higher rate of fertility. And if you were to look at first generation, which means they immigrated to this country, and then even second generation, which means their children who were born in this country, but their parents are immigrants, they tend to have more children, right? In fact, that's probably the most children, right? Like the largest number percentage-wise, not absolute. That's kind of confusing. Children of immigrants and the immigrants themselves, they have a lot more children than those that are native born here in the United States, okay? Whether the children integrate into the culture, do they learn the language, do they feel like they fit? It oftentimes depends on whether the parents have reasonable jobs, whether they have access to good health care. I don't think we want a situation where immigrant children are denied these things. I know that it's controversial, the idea that like if an immigrant comes illegally, should they receive health care and like public schooling and things like that. I think that if you deny it, it's very short-sighted. I understand the desire to not give those things. I just think that if you play that out, okay, what's it going to look like if you have a child who's growing up in America, doesn't have access to the doctor, and doesn't go to school? What's it going to be like when he's 22, right? Because I feel like the odds of him being a criminal are so much higher than if he didn't have those things. So. All right, the future of fertility rates is dependent on government policies regarding immigration. Okay, are we going to continue to grow, or are we going to level off or potentially shrink? A lot of it comes down to immigration, which is a hot topic as of this recording here in April of 2025, right? There's a lot of people in government who would like to basically shut down immigration from other countries. That's a stance. But if we do that, we're realizing that your population growth is coming from them. That's where you're coming from. So, all right, Ted Cruz, who is a senator from Texas, the great state. He predicts that illegal immigration is going to plummet immediately after Trump is inaugurated. And guess what? He was right. He was right. All indications so far indicate that the number of immigrants coming to this country illegally has indeed plummeted. Let's talk about religion. Religion, the religious identity affects how people interact with their family. This is interesting. Because we are less attached to our family today. We feel like we owe them less than we did in the past. The idea of blood being thicker than water, meaning like, yeah, my brother, sister, whoever is a deadbeat and I don't really enjoy their company, but they're blood, therefore I got to take care of them. That is kind of passing away, and I wonder if some of that has to do with the fact that our religious ideas, they play less of a role in society today than they used to in the past. It also impacts the number of children that people have. That's a big part of it. And how committed people are to their marriages and committed to their parents and people like that. I think that impacts religious ideas. May play a big role in that. Right? Because religions tend to pull people back toward the family, right? And secular ideas tend to pull people maybe toward money, right? Toward travel and, you know, other things like that that are not so family centered, right? Religious diversity is increasing. We have more people who are believing more things, including a big increase in the number of people who say, I have no religion, or I'm Christian, but I don't really attend, you know, like maybe I don't attend a church, or maybe I attend a church, but it's non-affiliated. It's not part of the Baptist or the Methodist. It's something like that. How does that impact things? Well, it's just that there's more people who are less committed to specific doctrines, right? And so it's going to show up in the family because, you know, doctrine is going to pull you back to the family, encourage you to have more children, encourage you to be more invested in the family and your parents and thinking about the home and things like that. So, religious people tend to have more children. Okay, what else? In 2021, heterosexual married couples and their children made up about 43% of the households. Okay, why is this significant? Because it used to be a lot more people. You know, you think about, like, if you were to walk down the average street in America and knock on doors, you could expect a lot of people to be consisting of married couples and their children, right? Today, it's less than half of those households. Well, what does it consist of? Well, it consists of single people. It consists of roommates. It consists of people who've got grandma in the house. It consists of maybe married couples who don't have children. Maybe their children moved out. Maybe they never had them. Okay. Marriage age has increased as well as the ages at which people get married. People are getting married later and later, and people are waiting sometimes even, you know, even to their 40s and 50s and 60s even to marry or remarry. Inequality. Let's look at some of the inequality among people. Probably the biggest thing that was emphasized in our book is the role of education. Maybe because the author of our book is in education. He's an instructor himself. So anyway, one major divide in families is along educational lines. Families with more education tend to do better in our economy today. They probably always have, but it seems like it's more pronounced. It seems like the divide between those that are educated and those are not is bigger today. With college graduates more likely to get married. When they do marry, this is different, they tend to marry another college graduate. Men used to be the ones who would get college educations, and they would tend to marry women who tended not to have college educations. But today, people tend to marry within the college graduation pool, right? And they tend to stay married. Okay, college educated wives, even though their husbands are making more money, they are more likely to be employed. This is a big deal because in the past, if the man was well employed, then his wife was likely staying home. But women are saying, hey, I'm well educated, I care about my career, I've invested all this time and energy into my education. I'm not just going to stay at home and care for your children. So, without a college education, those people are less likely to get married. They are typically not seen as an attractive mate. Sounds kind of harsh to say it like that. Therefore, more families with two high earners. So on the one hand, you've got more families who are like these families here. They've got people they're college educated and they're marrying somebody else who's college educated and they're married, okay? And both of them are working. I already said that. And on the other hand, you've got families with just one low wage earner, and they may not be married, right? More likely they're not married, right? That's why it's only one earner. Okay, so there's kind of this divide here. You've got well-educated people tend to be married, tend to both work, and then you've got people who are not college educated and they tend to be solo. I mean, it's just them and children, but it's just them, which causes a gap between the married couple and the single family. Big gap between those. All right. This is the median family income in families with children by family type, starting in 1974, going through 2021. I think this is gonna, yeah, okay. So let's draw some lines here. Nope, here we go. So let's look at the single mother here. And what you can see is of 1974, the single mother has increased her wages from about $25,000 to about $39,000. Okay, so I don't know, increase of 15,000, a little less. Okay, what about the single dad? Single dad has not really grown at all. He's flatlined. Okay, well, what about the married couple? Well, they were making $75,000. By the way, this is adjusted for inflation. These are not real numbers, right? But from $75,000 all the way up to $18,000, right? So significant growth in married couple income. And why is that? Primary reason is that at about right here, 1990s is when the wives began working, and so that increases the income significantly. What about health and time? This is not something we typically think about, but married people tend to be healthier. On the other hand, perhaps it's not that marriage causes people to be healthier. Maybe it's that healthier people are seen as more attractive and are more likely to get married. That makes sense to me as well. But you also could say, well, when people get married, they tend to shift toward a healthier behavior. So for instance, maybe somebody's looking for a mate and they're looking for a mate at the clubs, and so they're staying out late and they're drinking and maybe using some drugs, and then they find somebody and then they're like, I don't need to go to the clubs anymore. And so they stay home and immediately their health gets better, right? Because they're no longer staying up late, which means they're going to sleep a little bit better. They're no longer taking drugs and alcohol as much anyway. And so that makes sense. Married people tend to take care of each other. Okay. Time poverty. Time poverty is about having insufficient time for rest and leisure. All right, so think about it. If you're at home and it's just you, then you've got to take care of all the needs that the home has, taking care of the lawn and fixing the refrigerator when it breaks. And if there's two of you, then you can split those tasks with somebody else. Who has the least time available? Women with children. They are the most susceptible to time poverty. Why is that? Well, children suck up a lot of time, and women, if they're alone, they are likely to make less money, and they're also less likely to have college education, right? So which means they're going to make less and their jobs tend to be harsher and more demanding, like, the boss calls them in the day of, and makes them stay late and things that are, that would not fly. Those wouldn't go over very well among the well-educated jobs. All right. Within families, okay? So the inequality within a family has also decreased. As income has increased for women, husbands are now doing more childcare and housework. Now it's more equal, it is still not equal, okay? And we're giving preferential, which means we prefer sons over daughters. That has also decreased. That preference for male children has decreased over time. Maybe it has to do with the fact that income has increased for women. I'm not sure. However, men still tend to have higher incomes. I wonder if in 20 years we'll be still saying the same thing, because women who are well educated, who are working, and young women in the cities are now making more money than young men in the cities. So we'll see if we're still having the same conversation in 20 years. Women are still having a larger share of the housework and childcare. We said that already. Okay, let's talk about inequality from generation to generation. A family's background impacts the child's destination. We are heavily impacted by what our parents do when we're kids. Do they read to us at night? Do they cook for us? Do they yell at us? Do they encourage us to pursue education? Do they not? Our system is more capable, able to lift people out of poverty and hardship than we have had in the past, right? So modern capitalism, the fact that anyone can sell anything, we have free public education, we have social welfare, it makes it possible for children to move up, right? We have these like stages here that I've outlined, one to the next, right? So you have like kindergarten, early grade reading, middle grade math, high school graduation, post-secondary enrollment, post-secondary completion, big deal. A lot of people don't make it here. And then from there to employment. What you find, though, is that people can kind of like break off at any point. Like any of these transitions, people will fall off, right? Some people, aren't ready for kindergarten, right? They don't have the manual dexterity. They haven't learned the language well enough. They're, struggling to get along with other kids, and that puts them behind from the beginning. Learning to read, some children really struggle with that. Middle school, high school graduation, right? All these places are potential points of breaking, right? And so what we're saying here is that we have a situation where you could be successful. However, in the United States, most children are likely not going to surpass their parents. We have a pretty low rate of children doing better than their parents. If dad is a blue-collar worker, then son is likely to be a blue-collar worker. If dad is an engineer, son is likely to be an engineer. It's not true in other democracies. Other democracies, Canada, Great Britain, they do a better job of helping people whose parents are lower earners, lower education achievers, helping them be more successful. All right. Let's talk about demographic transition. Okay. Historically, what we've had is people have not lived very long, but we've had a lot of children, and those things are kind of equaled each other out. Okay. What we have now is we have high life expectancy and low birth rates. So we've flipped the script. Okay. With fewer children, we are able to invest more in each child. We give a lot more education to each child, a lot more opportunities, a lot more attention. Okay. But because we have more elderly people, we need to either increase the amount we're saving on an individual basis. I always tell people, hey, you should start a retirement fund the day you start working. Or as a nation, we need to say, we got to quit building so many bombers and bridges, and we need to focus more of that money on caring for the older people. Here's a visual demonstration of this. This is a traditional age pyramid here in 1900, where the largest group is the youngest, right? And by the time you get into your 60s, there just aren't that many people, right? But then you can see the transition here in the 1960s, right? And now 2020, we've got more people who are in this age group here in their 30s than we do in the youngest age group. Right? How many people are older, age 65 and older? Well, as a percentage, you can see here, about 100 years ago, it was less than 5%. And then today, well, here we are right here. We're about right there, about 15%. But the expectation is by 2060, I guess I will be older at that point, then we're going to have closer to 23%. Obviously, can't know the future. Another pandemic could come through and change all of this, but that is what the trend line says. We have a culture of not having as many children. We have a falling birth rate. How many children per woman? Well, less than it was 10 years ago, which was less than it was 10 years before that, and so on. It hasn't been a straight downward trend. It hasn't been like this, because we had the baby boomers. But that was, kind of like a 10-year period that was different, very different from that. So what do we do if people don't want to have enough children? What if you do people are like, I just don't want to have kids? They're seeing this in South Korea. People just don't want to have children, and so they're trying to figure out, how do you solve this problem, right? Why do you need people, right? Well, you need workers, right? Unless, I don't know, maybe we'll have, AI do that kind of stuff, but certainly, you need voters, you need neighbors, you need caretakers. You can't do all of it with technology. And so, on the other hand, falling birth rates has really gone a long way to improving the lives of women and reducing the amount of the power difference between men and women. Right? So it makes sense for women to do this. It just may be bad for society, is the thought, right? And because we are a democracy where we have individual rights, the government can't say to women, hey, you have to have children. The government can say that in places like Russia and China, but in America, we can't do that. So, all right. Are we becoming inhospitable to child rearing, right? Maybe we're saying things like, hey, make sure you get your job set up first before you think about kids, right? We talk like children are very important, but we tend to be kind of lazy when it comes to protecting them from technology. We've got kids, really young ages, using phones, looking at pornography. We are just reluctant to shelter them from violence. We underfund the programs that are aimed at schools and health care for children. We're in the process right now of cutting health care for children. We allow over 10% of them to live in poverty. It's a higher poverty rate than it is our elderly people, which you could argue, I don't, but you could argue that elderly people are much more deserving of poverty than the young, because the young had no opportunity to change things for themselves, whereas the older, at least they had some opportunity to do that. So, perhaps we are inhospitable to child rearing. We're unwilling to give women paid time off to have children, at least guaranteed paid time off to have children. It's very difficult to find high quality child care for women, and so it's maybe we're deserving it. Maybe we're setting up this situation, and we're getting what we've designed. Here is the living arrangements of Americans 65 years and older. And what you can see here is that, let's see, in terms of owning their own household, and they're in their own household with no children, and they're married. As people get older, especially women, then they are much less likely to be in their own households without their children's help. men die, there's a lot less men who are 85 and older than there are women. So that's why this big difference between here and here. And so what else sticks out? In terms of institutions, you are much more likely to be in a nursing home if you are older, right? Very few of them who are here when they're 65 to 74, and a lot more of them here when they're older. But still, the vast majority of 85-year-olds and older are not in nursing homes or institutions of other sorts, right? How many of them are living with their children in the child's household? Well, again, it's less than 10%, but you're most likely when you're in 85 and older. Well, that's men. Okay, women are a little bit more likely, about 12% of them, right? By the way, whose house are they in? Daughters tend to play the role of caretaker of the elderly persons much more so than sons do. Maybe that's why we prefer daughters today more than we did in the past. I'm not sure. All right, let's talk about modern identities. Cultural changes have reshaped the way we think about ourselves and our family life. I am a big believer that we used to have a lot more groups that gave us a lot more identity than we do today. Today, we are much more likely to think of ourselves as individuals. And as a modern individual, we choose who is going to be part of our family, not just based upon blood, but we choose, hey, you're healthy for me, you're not, you're going to be part of my family, you're not going to be part of my family, or not a family member at all. It's interesting that we think about this so much more intentionally than we did in the past. I think in the past we wouldn't have hardly thought about it at all. We would have just been like, oh, this is just what I do. I'm staying close to home until I get married, and then I will move out, of my parents' house, or I will just kind of go through these steps without really like thinking about the options. Whereas today we're much more likely to think much more deeply, like, am I the kind of person who wants to be a husband? Do I want to be a mother? Do I want to do these things? And you're thinking about am I that kind of a person? And I get these are just modern questions that we're answering, right? And why are we doing them today? Well, one of the reasons is that we have the freedom to do so. We have a lot more options available to us. In the past, we would have called somebody old maids for not getting married. We would have asked what's wrong if people were choosing to not have children. And today, there's just a lot more opportunities for people to just live and let live, right? There's much more just people like freedom to just, hey, find your own way, be your true self, that sort of thing. What are the responses to the family change? We've got 3 different responses that we're going to talk about here. We're going to talk about the conservative response, we'll talk about the liberal response, and then we'll talk about the critical response to this. Okay. So you can think about the response to, like, let's define before we go on here what we're talking about. So there's a response of like, okay, a lot more people are choosing not to get married. A lot more people are choosing not to have children. A lot more people are choosing to divorce. A lot more people are identifying as gay or lesbian. A lot more people are just thinking about family and behaving in a way that is non-traditional. So you could think about it as like some people are going to accept it, some people are going to criticize it, some people are going to shame it, right? We have come a long way in that we're much more likely to say that being diversity, doing things different, a variety of styles, not just everyone getting married and having children and sticking with that, right? We're seeing it much more as a good thing than a bad thing, right? Especially true of people who identify as being liberal and people who are younger. Okay, a large group say, it doesn't really matter to me. I'm going to do my thing, you can do your thing. So in terms of the growing diversity and people's attitudes toward it, and we have kind of a split here where what is it? A third of people, 1 out of every 3 people, say that it's a good thing. About 1 out of every 3 people say it doesn't make a difference, and then, I don't know, About 20% say it's a bad thing. Okay? If you look at who these people are, people who are, say, very conservative, then they are much more likely to say that it's a bad thing here. And people who are very liberal are much more likely to say it's a good thing and much less likely to say that it's a bad thing. What you can see here is that the younger somebody is, the more likely they are to say it's a good thing, and the older they are, the more likely they're saying like it's no difference. Doesn't make a difference. So moving on. Well, that would have been nice earlier. Okay, so let's talk about conservatives. So conservatives are going to say, hey, there's a singular ideal, like there's one family type, and it's really the thing everyone should shoot for, which makes the diversity, the change, a bad thing. They're going to say a married couple, man and woman, is the ideal family type. Okay, and so then what we should do as a country is to encourage that by creating laws and regulations to do that. And this would be things like, giving more tax benefits to married couples, and having adoption agencies that are state-run prefer to give children to married heterosexual couples. Okay, and that we should encourage the wives to stay at home, and things of that nature. For some people, it's about religion, and they're going to say, hey, like there's these values that I have, they're religiously based. Others just say that it just works better, and it's not really about a doctrine. They're just saying it's just practical. On a practical level, when you have this setup, this is what's worked for thousands and thousands of years, and so that's what we're going to stick to, because we just know it's been time tested, where we haven't tested some of these other ideas that we're beginning to institute. So, all right, liberals, second group here, they're saying change is okay, right? There's tolerance for difference, right? They're not against the traditional American family, but they're also open to new ones. It's sort of a hands-off. You're going to live your life and I'm going to live mine, which means you're promoting relaxing the restrictions on family behavior, right? Not an endorsement. It's just, welcoming. Whereas the third group here is critical, and they're saying change is good, right? And the view is that the traditional family should decline, right? And that the breakdown of the dominant family form has allowed women to thrive, whereas before they were suffocated in that. And they're going to support defamilization. It's not a word you hear much. Policies that are going to free people from the family. So they're going to say, hey, we should not be, giving tax benefits to married couples any more than we would other family styles, right? And they're going to, what can we do to help all people get good health insurance, not just people who are married to somebody who's, at a company that has good health insurance. So the tendency to live together across generational lines has rebounded. Okay, so one of the things to realize is that traditionally we did live with extended families. And so the only reason we were not living with extended families in the past is because we were really wealthy during that post-World War II era, which was, 80 years ago now. And so anyway, we've come back together. Why? Because times have been tough for a lot of Americans. Okay, two patterns here: young adults living with their parents and children living with their grandparents. Okay, the boomerang generation, which is people who are boomerang. The children leave and then they may come back, if they leave at all. But those are the ones that I was thinking about. I just saw a silly movie with Will Ferrell called Step Brother, in which he's 40 years old and he's living with his mother, right? I don't think he ever left, actually. So you have more young adults who are living with their parents. By the way, this is not as socially acceptable in the United States as it is in many other countries. Many other countries, it's the expectation for people to live with their family until they get married, and then even then they may live with their parents, and then once they have children, then that's usually the time when they kind of move out into their own place. But provides a lot of benefits to the young adults. And with housing prices, it's probably why they're doing it here, right? We have a doubling since the 1960s of young adults 25 to 34 living with their parents. Why is that? Well, sometimes there's a money issue. Maybe they lose their job. Maybe they get divorced. Maybe the housing costs are so expensive they just can't afford to live on their own. Here we have a chart that kind of demonstrates this here in the 1960s, which was when it was affordable to do so, right? During this time period, it was much more affordable to live independently, and then since then, you just see an upward trajectory, right? And then children living with their grandparents. This is an increasing number of young children living with grandparents, most common in lower income families. Grandparents may want to do it, they may not want to do it, they may feel obligated to do so. Sounds like they're feeling more obligated, as it's often the last resort before foster care system. I've heard of some cases where the parents they're addicted to drugs, especially opioids, and they are unable to parent. Maybe the police are involved and the state is taking the kids, and the kids are going to go to live somewhere else, and the grandparents are taking the kids so that they don't go to strangers' houses. In conclusion, I think we have one more idea after this, but maybe not. We have increasing family diversity that is also accompanied by increasing economic inequality. The rich are getting richer, the poor are kind of just maintaining. They're not really getting that much poorer. As the population ages, and we have more people who are older, the family and the market cannot provide the necessary resources to care for older people. That Social Security is in countdown mode till it begins cutting the amount that people are receiving. Medicare, which is the health insurance for older people, is a very, very large ticket item that it's very expensive for the government. So the state may have to step in and step up. They may have to do more than they currently do. So we have conflicting attitudes in our culture around new family forms, around what is considered acceptable for people to do within their families. So, all right, last one here, the limits of longevity. Centenarians are the fastest growing segment of the population. Centenarians are people who are living to be 100 years old, people who are 100 and older, right? And then we have super centenarians, are those who are living to be 110 and older. How long can they go? I don't know. Perhaps we'll come up with some gene therapy that will allow all of us to live to be 100. We'll slow down aging. We can do it in other life forms. We're playing around with like bacteria and other insects and things that we can cause them to live a lot longer. But maybe we don't want to do that. Maybe having a lot of older people won't necessarily equal a better life for the person, the individual, or the society that is there. And so these are trade-offs. Perhaps it will only be for people who are very rich. I think about Warren Buffett, who is one of the richest men in America, and I think he's 93 or 94 as we speak. And so maybe people like him, maybe he's already on that sort of thing, some sort of super, thing that prevents him from aging. And so anyway, that is all I've got. Thank you for watching until the end.